everybody. How are we all today? We're here to talk about how to stay connected through this period of isolation. So we've titled the webinar today, Engagement Over Isolation, Tools to Stay Connected. Okay, so we are here to talk about strategies for staying connected while we're all isolated. Today, we're going to be talking about our strategies for staying productive and connected. We're going to be talking about mindset mastery, and I'm going to be sharing with you some neuro hacks for success. Now, today, I'm going to share with you our top tools for keeping connected. And this is really, I guess, when I sat down to think about the feedback from the last webinar we ran a couple of weeks ago, and lots of you were asking, what are the top tips for keeping connected? And as I thought about that, I started to think about, what are the top 10 things that I would say are really valuable in terms of tools and strategies to help us stay connected to other people and stay productive. So that's what I'm going to run you through today. Before we do that, though, I just want to share a couple of thoughts with you. When we talk about communication versus proximity, I think, and I'm seeing more and more in the current environment, that I think a lot of the time we think showing up is enough. Like somehow people know what I'm really like, or people understand me. People know I'm just a bit blunt when I speak, or people know that I talk, as many of you do about me. People know that I talk 1,000 miles an hour. They expect that from me. They're okay with that. And this is particularly challenging for leadership at the moment, because what we're seeing is it takes a different kind of way of communicating to hold your team together. So our leaders are often the glue that holds the team together in the workplace, and not always, but often. And sometimes that comes from the little rituals that these leaders as individuals apply, that they might walk around, say good morning to everyone, that they encourage morning tea, that they're very, they're humorous, they encourage people to have a laugh, which obviously cuts through our cognitive processes and helps us deal with stress. So often when we're in leadership, and I don't only mean the manager of the team, by the way, I mean anyone who takes a leadership role, it's the little things that we do that create that connectedness between people. And that connectedness ultimately ends up being our culture, right? Our relationships, our interactions with each other, the way we interpret each other, the way we communicate with each other. But there is a difference between proximity and true communication. And now we're seeing the absence of proximity, yeah? Like we're not near each other anymore. So it's getting kind of challenging to figure out how do we stay connected when we don't have the benefit of proximity. So I just want to throw that in there because I really want you to just reflect on, as we move through today's content, just think about, who am I? How is it that I be? Who do I be in the workplace that has it go from just, us just being around in the same place doing our own work to us actually being connected? And how do I bring that to this isolation, this environment of isolation where we don't have proximity? Okay, so in terms of the origin of experience, just by way of background, because we are going to talk today about the brain-based model, which is essentially a way that we can neuro-hack our way to happiness, right? So most people think as a general rule, it's the situational circumstances which makes me feel a certain way, which then causes my reaction or action. But we know that quite a lot goes on between emotion and action. All of that cognitive process that occurs in the brain, where we take our feelings, we assign a meaning to our feeling, to our emotion, and that creates a belief, and a belief repeated over time creates our identity. And that's what actually drives that action at the end. Now, our first experience will always be emotional, because all experience travels up the spine as electromagnetic current. First part of the brain that deals with our experience is that emotion center. Where was I? Yeah, so first part of the brain that deals with experience is always emotion. And so it's easy to think that that's the first thing that occurs. But we know from looking at maps of the brain and brain imagery, and I've got a little clip in here, I'll show you this in a moment. We know that thought fires before emotion in the brain, yeah? So it's actually, there's a situation, a set of circumstances, a trigger event, and then we have a thought. But the first thing that we notice tangibly is the emotion. Now, the emotion, we assign a meaning to it. We like to label things. We like to have clarity about what's going on. So we assign a meaning to our emotions. That creates our belief. Our belief or story gets repeated over time, and that creates the identity. And the identity drives the action or reaction. So if we want to get a handle on something, then the way that we really do that is by figuring out what's this thought. We want to be looking at what is the thought behind the emotion, because that is what is driving everything. Now, when we talk about, driving everything, what do I mean by that? Well, what gets automated is what gets created, right? So it's not as much, we talk about sayings like what we focus on grows and expands, and that sort of thing. Like what we're thinking about is what we will manifest. But this ain't no woo-woo kind of spiritual thing I'm trying to bring into the corporate place here. This is the theory of neuroscience. Our brain is not wired to make a difference between the story we're telling it and the truth. All it knows is that when we think a certain thought, we have a certain feeling, and then that leads us ultimately to action. So whatever we're automating in the pattern of our brain, the way that we wire our brain neurons, is what is going to create our experience. It is never, never, never the situation, the other person, the set of circumstances, or even the emotion. It's the belief and identity that come out of our emotion, and the thought that is behind the emotion. That's what's creating our experiences. If you've never seen the way that our neural pathways form, it's quite interesting. It's like a little electrical pulse. One little line hooks up with another little line, and suddenly we've made an automation in the brain. And from that automation, we get experience. I love this model because it helps us understand that if we monitor our thoughts, which is the first of our top 10 tips for staying connected, if we use the brain-based model, which is the model I just explained, so it is the situation, thought, emotion, belief, identity, action, that is the brain-based model. Now, if we use the brain-based model, we can work backwards at any time when we're having an experience that we're not happy with. So it doesn't matter, where you come in, what your entry point is into that model. But if you notice that you're feeling really frustrated, or something's going on that you're not happy about, we can actually use that model to work back and figure out, what is the thought that I was thinking that created the feeling that I felt? Those are the questions that we suggest asking yourself. And, it's not natural for us as humans, because the first thing that we want to do when we have a sticky feeling, or a feeling we don't like or label as negative, is we want to escape it. Would you agree? So it's, therein lies the challenge, right? Because we actually want to lean into it. We want to notice the thinking and start to get curious. So that's the first of our top 10 tips. Second one is about managing reactions. We've got the picture here, time for action, because it very much is about action. And it's really important to figure out with action and reaction, where is that line? Taking action is important because it's what gains momentum. But we need to, pardon the spelling error on the screen in front of you there. But we need to make sure that we're taking purposeful action that's going to drive us towards the outcome that we really want, rather than just reaction that comes out of that emotion center in the brain. Thirdly, of course, communicate for outcomes, because we do want to get into action. So it is important to figure out, how are we going to start practicing gratitude and show up for others? And I'm going to give you some ways to do that next. But communicating for outcomes is about embracing diversity, about understanding that people think in very different ways and they interpret information in very different ways. I'm not just talking about learning styles here. I'm talking about the way that we process in the brain, and that's largely determined by the background filters and stories that we filter information through. So if you're familiar with the ladder of inference, then you'll be aware that, we have things that happen that either reinforce or challenge our background stories. So really important in communicating, to start to think, well, who is this person that I'm communicating with? And what do I know about them? And what might be missing from what I know about them that I should consider in my interaction with them? I think this is key at the moment, because a lot of the time we're communicating with no visuals at all. Like we're all sitting in our own separate spaces in our offices and at home or wherever we might be, and we're not able to read facial expression. Sometimes if we're operating on, on Microsoft Teams or via Zoom link, we might not even be able to infer tone very well. So it's really important that we think about, what is it that I need to communicate and what are the communication tools that I can use to make sure that I am actually effective here. Okay, so the next step is gratitude. And we talk about this 5x5 exercise for hacking your way to happiness. I love gratitude because I think it's win-win. It's a bit like exercise. Exercise keeps you healthy. It keeps you feeling good because of the endorphins. It keeps you looking good because it's a healthy thing to do. And so, it's a win-win, right? What's good for the body is good for the mind and soul. Now, gratitude can be the same thing. When we practice gratitude, we naturally start developing a more optimistic view. We often refer to it as the optimistic orientation. But gratitude and optimism, they're not the same thing. Not just because gratitude is about being thankful for things, which does create optimism in the psychological context, but because optimism is about the future and gratitude is about being present to where we are now and being appreciative, looking appreciatively at the past. So this is the 5x5 exercise that we always suggest to people, particularly in coaching. So you spend 5 minutes a day on these 5 simple questions. What are the opportunities that I'm noticing this week? And that takes us right back to that beginning one where we're like, monitor your thoughts, right? What is it that I'm leaning into here? Start to notice your resistance and ask yourself, even if it's something that's uncomfortable, and remembering that around 50% of the emotions we experience at any given point are going to be negative. So the more that we can just notice our emotions, notice our responses in a non-judgmental way, and ask ourselves, what is the opportunity and the learning here? What can I appreciate this week? So what are the simple things that I can appreciate about what's going on right now? What am I seeing about myself from all this? And I think it was Kim who said just before that I'm loving Microsoft Teams, right? Loving the app. And that can be a surprise if we didn't think we were good at technology or whatever. It's that I've been watching this with my 5-year-old because, of course, we've got him at home now, schooling him at home. And, it's been, just such a challenge because it distracts me from being productive and doing my job. A challenge because I feel like I'm failing him when I think that my parenting is not effective in helping him achieve the outcomes of the lesson or whatever. I feel like a bit of a loser because I'm not that great at figuring out this technology that the school's got us using. So all of these kinds of things. But every day we're getting just a little bit better. And I feel so happy and thankful to have this opportunity of time with him and to have moved through the challenging periods. Because, to be honest, I thought about sending him back to school. I was like, oh, this is not working. I can't get any work done. This is not going to, this is not good. So I thought about sending him back to school. And then when I reflected on that later in the day, I was like, the thought here is just that I can't do it. I don't necessarily think he's better off at school. I just was worried that I couldn't do it, right? So when I traced that thought back, the feeling was of failure and frustration, but the thought behind that was that I'm not good enough. So I feel really grateful for the opportunity to be able to face off with that thought and choose something more positive and rewire my neurons for a more effective outcome that helps me stay connected to him and stay present to his needs, but also figure out how to balance these different things. What a gift, And that last question we've got there, what are 5 things I'll be grateful for when I look back on this time? I think about that a lot, how resourceful we have to be at the moment to juggle all these different things or to deal with all these different circumstances. And be for others. I don't know if any of you guys are experiencing this influx of the blue butterflies. I know they don't look like this one, but on the Gold Coast. And I think I heard that it's happening in Brisbane too. There's this like massive influx of butterflies, and I'm sure there's some very good. I know we've got lots of people online today from the Department of Natural Resources and Mines and Energy. You guys will probably have a better scientific explanation for what's happening for me, but I'm I'm just feeling like, you know, we're all taking this collective breath. We're breathing deeply. The air is cleaner. You know, we're more present to the things that matter. Of course, we're still balancing the challenges that come with the change. And as we know, change always creates challenge. And there's a period of transition in which we can be very lost and overwhelmed and even resentful and angry and conflict oriented. But ultimately, you know, there are some really good opportunities that come out of any change, any time. You know, that ability to say to myself, okay, well, I'm finding it really hard to adapt to these new technologies, but what's the reframe? The reframe is, even though we've all gone to our own environments and everyone I'm talking to, I can see their bookshelf or their kitchen behind them, but we're really, to me, it's like we're really starting to appreciate everyone's life is so different. Everyone's circumstances and environment is so different, and how lucky we are to have the technology to still be able to connect. Because this obviously was not the case back in war times, or for a lot of people. For a lot of people. Next tip, I wanted to just reflect on the importance of centering ourselves. And I think I'm hearing from so many people that they're really doing this at the moment. And a simple example of ways to do this at the moment, I just thought of it now. The first couple of days that I was homeschooling Archie was a real struggle, and my partner and I started having these conversations. Look, he's only 5, right? My partner and I are both a bit like a bit of overachievers, you know, we can be a bit perfectionistic. We started talking about, he's putting the sticks on the D's on the wrong side. They look like B's. Maybe he's dyslexic. We started getting all, you know, anxious and worried about it. I went and asked the teacher. She was like, get a grip. But yeah, so what I tried with him the next day was we did some kids yoga in the backyard under the trees before we started any of the schoolwork. And just, you know, it took him some time to ease into that process. And I'm no yogi by any stretch of the imagination, but it gave us this amazing opportunity to connect and to just take a breath. And then I did a little meditation with him, and he has to do reading practice as part of his schooling. So instead of doing the prescribed writing practice, instead of doing the prescribed writing, I just got him to write down the words of what he saw in his meditation. And so, you know, he was really centered. And then when it came time to start the lesson, I noticed that he was markedly different, and I felt markedly different as well. And I think that's a combination of getting centered and connecting. So I think they're both really valuable things to do. Next step, be authentic and presence vulnerability. Super important, because we're seeing from the results of surveys that are coming in, there are still a lot of people out there who are concerned about, oh, I don't want to get on the Teams app because, you know, the kitchen's behind me and I haven't done the dishes this morning, or they can see my bedroom because that's where I've got the office set up. Or, you know, I think it's really important that we all just get real with each other at the moment. We're all operating in unusual times, and we're all experiencing some challenges and constraints associated with that. Well, not all, but, you know, most people, certainly most people I'm talking to. So if we can just take off that need to look good, to have it all work right, and just to be present with what shows up, and still be able to connect with each other and be there for each other, then I think that's really valuable at this time. And, you know, just so that you know as well, all of the research shows us that when we talk about leadership and we talk about teams that have a high level of trust, and organizations that are considered to have very good cultures or cultures of excellence, you will always find a metric around high levels of trust. So if we want to build trust, we've got to presence authenticity. Authenticity and vulnerability are 2 of the top 8 things that people look for in conscious leaders, or but that people consider to be good leadership skills. So the more real we can be with each other, the better. Okay, next step is about developing that optimistic orientation that I mentioned earlier, and some simple questions to ask yourself here are, what's my biggest challenge here? Who else might be feeling like this? What could I do to help them? You know, this is all about the extension of that being for other people and taking a positive role. So we can get trapped in the stuff that feels negative and hard, or we can ask ourselves, what's one thing I can do to shift this energy? And I always suggest first we shift our own energy, and then we go shift someone else's energy. It's a bit like the old oxygen mask in the plane. But if you can't figure out what you can do, like if you really can't come up with anything for yourself, that you can do to make yourself, to shift the energy for yourself, then pick up the phone and show up for someone else. If you can't show up for yourself, showing up for someone else will alter your energy. I guarantee you that. And a really great exercise there is to write a future self letter. So imagine yourself, if you're a journaler, you probably do this sort of stuff already. Imagine yourself 6 months in the future when we're all back in the office environment and working the way we did previously, or maybe we won't ever go back to that kind of structure or environment. Imagine you have a difficult relationship with your manager, for example, and then you project yourself. The technique is actually called aspecting. You project yourself out into the future where this problem has been solved, and you write yourself a letter acknowledging all of the changes and growth in you that has resulted from moving through this challenge. Okay, and then the next step is about noticing our filters. So this is step number 8 of our top 10 tips. And noticing our filters is about recognizing what are the stories that are running the show right now, you know? When we talk about those thoughts that precede emotions, a lot of the time they're automatic and we're not even aware. And our brain, as I mentioned at the start of this session, it's wired to do what it knows how to do. It's wired to be effective, and it's diligent about being effective. It doesn't want to innovate for you. It doesn't want to find new neural pathways. That's your job. Your brain just runs the patterns that you automate. So the more often we do the work of thinking certain thoughts, of choosing certain thoughts, the stronger those connections become. And that's neuroplasty. So if we want to change our thought, we have to if we want to change our experience, we have to be willing to change the thinking behind the current experience. And this is why when we look at the theory of epigenetics, we can see that, you know, meditation, affirmations, journaling, these sorts of things are all really, really powerful. They have a powerful impact on us. But if we have a second tape running in the background, which is our subconscious thought patterns, that are the opposite of what we're journaling or what we're affirming to ourselves when we look in the mirror, then we're still going to be stuck in those thought patterns, right? So, you know, people will often say to me in coaching, I'm doing all this work, I'm journaling, I'm meditating, I'm exercising, I'm doing affirmations every day, and yet I still feel like this. Well, that is because there is an underlying subconscious thought pattern in the brain or neurological pattern that is running the show. Now, 80 to 90% of our experience throughout the day is generated as a result of the subconscious. So the subconscious is occurring all the time back there. If you want to optimize your experience, you need to optimize your brain. You need to be able to figure out what is it that I'm thinking that's creating this result. And one of the best tools that you can use for doing that is the unhelpful thinking patterns tool. And these are the 10 unhelpful thinking patterns. Most of you are probably familiar with them. If you're not, have a look in the ebook. If you've got my ebook, you'll see a whole chapter on these. But negative focus is that, you know, always leaning towards the negative. And you can see that there's a little description and example in there for each of the 10 unhelpful thinking patterns. But these thinking patterns often act as filters. So, you know, I said before that if you want to change your experience, if you want to optimize your experience, you've got to optimize your thinking, your brain. So you've got to notice which of these filters is running. So just have a look through these and see which one resonates for you. If you need more information on it, let me know. But these are some really good neuro hacks that can help you get to happiness. When we start to figure out, what's the pattern of thinking that I apply to most things, you can see what's being automated in your brain. And what we automate is what we create. So we will keep experiencing whatever patterns we have automated. Now, here's the only thing I want to say about that, because people often say to me in coaching, oh yeah, but I'm really feeling this. I really feel this way. I really feel like it's unjust, or I really feel like I can't trust her. You're still going to feel it, right? Your brain wiring doesn't prevent you from feeling. In fact, quite the opposite. So the thinking that is wired into your neurological pathways is creating an emotional response. So until you create a different pathway, you're still going to experience the same emotions. And, you know, the brain is a muscle, right? And like any muscle, when we start to work it out, what do we notice? We notice resistance. We notice our desire not to experience those feelings, or not to lean into the thinking. So when we talk about brain priming, we're talking about getting really clear on not only what future do we want and starting to create that future with our daily practices, but also getting really clear on what are the subconscious thoughts or filters that we're moving our experiences through now that are creating the current experience. A few words in closing. Growth comes from stretching. So I want to encourage you to notice your resistance first. Lean into resistance when you notice it. The first thing most people want to do when they notice their own resistance is avoidance. You know, avoidance is a natural response to resistance. There's two things we can do. We can either lean into resistance or we can feel the pain. It doesn't just disappear because we avoid it. We all know that. But there is great gold in leaning into our resistance and getting curious and asking ourselves, what is the thought that sits behind this resistance? I know for me, most of the time that I procrastinate is because I'm not sure how to start. And I'm always really present to, oh yeah, I just have to start and it'll be okay. And I can make myself do that and push through. Probably many of you can do the same. But I get a better result and I'm far more effective and things happen quicker and flow more smoothly if I'm able to really dig under that and say, well, what's the thought that is telling me that I don't know where to start? And usually for me, it's a fear of, not being liked or not being approved of, or what if they don't like the result? So far more important to dive into the thought underneath that initial layer of thinking and emotion. That's really the opportunity to flip the switch, right? If we can go back to that brain-based model and say to ourselves, well, what is it that how can I trace this feeling back? And once we get, back underneath that first feeling, oh, it feels like this, it's really a fear of failure. If we can really get back to what is the thought I'm thinking that creates this experience, we can flick the switch in an instant. It is quite transformative. And we see this all the time in coaching, right? When people are like, oh, I was thinking that. That's how I got there. I had someone I was working with in a one-on-one coaching session the other day, and she's been working with one of our other coaches, because there's a team of us, for a period of time, right? And we've only had a couple of conversations, and she said, oh, that different perspective is enough to, I see what that other coach has been talking to me about all this time. So sometimes it's about just resourcing ourselves. What can I do differently? Who can I talk to make it different? And there's never a problem with that, by the way. It's always really healthy to get a variety of inputs. And if you're working with a coach or mentor and you feel like it's a little bit stale and you want a different perspective, then absolutely make a shift, make the change and see if it makes a difference. Sometimes even just one or two conversations with someone different is enough, because we get used to and locked into our patterns of communicating, our cycles of communication. And so we start to think, oh, it's that person or it's this circumstance. When the circumstance changes, I'll be able to have a different result. That's not the case. We just need to alter something about how we think and flick that switch. Okay, so before we close, I just wanted to speak to you a little bit about this culture pulse checking that we're doing. So it's really fascinating way for us to have a look at how is culture being altered. This is one example, not relevant to the current scenario, but we look at what's going on for people. The reason why I want to share this with you is because as you start to manage your communications and lead your teams through this period, it's really valuable to do a bit of a benchmarking exercise. It doesn't have to be with us, right? You can do that however you want to do it. But understanding where people are right now and then doing the work to support them that speaks into where they are. And this is the piece that many leaders miss in terms of what I refer to as inspired engagement. This is the engagement piece that is missing a lot of the time when people are not landing as great managers. It's that we didn't take the time to find out, where are people right now? What experience are they having? Really valuable to benchmark culture. And you can do that in a one-on-one relationship. You can do that within your team. You can do that right across your organizations. But my suggestion is, before we create new products, before we provide support mechanisms, let's find out where people are and what's going to be useful, so that what we give them is of value. Otherwise, it's a waste of everyone's time, and in many cases, money as well. So sustaining improved culture or sustaining enhanced cultural outcomes is about getting in that pattern. It's a loop. You know, just because we do an employee engagement survey once a year and it takes 3 months for us to get the results back and have a conversation about them, you know, people have moved on by then. So those processes can become, I still think they're very valuable and they have a place, but they can become a bit static. It's really important to stay connected to people and to benchmark what is going on inside the experience every kind of fortnight, every month at least. Fortnight is better. Lots of clients are doing it weekly at the moment, just to keep a finger on the pulse of what's going on. Okay, and I want to leave you with this thought. So, you know, for me at the moment, it's all about rise, pivot, and advance. And, you know, what I mean is take the opportunity for growth. Take the opportunity to expand yourself. Take the opportunity to self-reflect, to reflect on your goals, to think about what you want, to think about who you want to be as a leader or a colleague. Take that time to rise. Where else are we going to get kind of 30 days where we've got a little bit of relaxation, you know, and fresh air, symbolically and literally, to be able to work in our own environments at our own pace, according to our own timelines, and use that opportunity to really step into the bigger version of yourself, the biggest version of yourself. And then, you know, that might require some pivot, right? And I don't mean change for the sake of change. What I mean is, what small focused tweaks can you make so that you can actualize that vision of yourself, using this time to actualize that vision of yourself. And then advance, well, that's all about taking action. So step into that bolder, brightest version of yourself or vision of yourself. Figure out with laser sharp accuracy, you know, which way do I need to go? What is important here and what can I let go of? And then take action. All action creates momentum and momentum creates results. So that brings us to the end of today. We will head out for the day. Hope you all have a fabulous weekend and I look forward to seeing you again next time we're on the webinar. Bye-bye.